But I just hope that Trump will get Starmer to reverse the mega embassy decision, because that was just atrocious. I mean, this is Neville Chamberlain-level atrocious. I think the Chinese have some influence because they've been supplying Iran with everything except for combat soldiers, sailors, and pilots. But everything else. On TikTok, about 96.5% or so of the videos about Hamas favor the terrorist group. That's not organic. That's because of the Chinese algorithm.
Now, President Trump says he'll get a big fat hug from China's communist dictator Xi Jinping when the pair meet in Beijing next month. But that won't be the case if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, choking off China's much-needed oil supplies from their fellow global bad boys, Iran. Trump claims he has a guarantee there'll be no more weapons for Tehran from China. Reports suggest Beijing was ready to supply Iran with weapons to shoot American jets out of the skies. So will Trump's blockade be a masterstroke to force China's hand? Or is this all in danger of a massive escalation? Joining me to discuss all that and much more is leading China analyst and old friend of Harry Cole Saves the West, Gordon Chang. Welcome back to the show. Gordon, is President Trump going to get a hug? Xi Jinping doesn't strike me as the cuddly-feely type at the best of times.
Well, literally, he's not going to get a hug. Figuratively, I don't know. First of all, if this war continues through the middle of May, I don't think President Trump will go to Beijing, and certainly he shouldn't go to Beijing because China is an enemy combatant to the United States, and he shouldn't go there at any time, I believe, but certainly not in the midst of a conflict.
He's already cancelled the visit once. The Chinese government, take their sort of diplomacy quite seriously. They don't like to be spurned. But how badly do you think that would go down if you pulled out of visiting again? These visits like this are sort of months and years sometimes in the making.
I think the Chinese will really be upset, and that's great because Americans throughout the course of decades, going back to Nixon, have been desperate to talk to Chinese. We have chased after them literally and figuratively. And, it has just inflated their already big sense of egos and sense of self-importance. So I think sometimes the best way to deal with China is to ignore it, let them chase us. Anybody who has ever been a teenager and been in a dating experience should know what I'm talking about.
The love of the chase. I don't know what you're talking about. Heaven forbid. It does seem that the president is doing a sort of two-pronged approach at the moment. Yes, he's trying to shut the strait, the blockade on the blockade, and that's to blockade Iranian ships, which most of them seem to be heading to China. Then his message this morning was, again, a forked message. It was, it's going to be great. We love each other. Isn't it nice that we're all getting on instead of fighting? Oh, but when we do fight, we're the best fighters in the world. So it seems that there's movement. It feels like there's a negotiation going on behind the scenes that we're not quite seeing yet. And China could actually yet show its hand in this conflict.
Yes, and President Trump has always kept his opponents off balance. And you mentioned this sort of dual approach of really hitting them hard, but at the same time being rhetorically very nice to Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin. You pick your bad actor. And I think that the Chinese look at this and are really perplexed. They can deal with a hostile American president. They've dealt with hostile American presidents. The one thing they can't deal with is an unpredictable one, and Trump has been unpredictable. Now, he says things I don't like for a lot of reasons, but nonetheless, it does seem to make the Chinese a little bit nervous, and that's a good place for them to be.
This is madman theory. We talked about this a lot on this show. We had an author, James D. Boys, on who's actually written a book about this. The problem that Nixon had was the Chinese and the Russians didn't actually believe he was mad. So you can do all the unpredictable madman theory. But at the end of the day, no one ever thought Nixon was going to use the bomb. Do you think it's genuinely different with Donald Trump, that his enemies, the Chinese, the Russians, genuinely don't know what he's thinking?
Yeah, I think they genuinely do not know, because Trump has been giving conflicting signals. Nixon was very different. He did employ, and he actually talked about the madman theory. Trump has mentioned a little bit about it, but they're very different styles of negotiation. So I think that there's a lot of difference in the way that they approach the madman theory. I think Trump right now is getting sort of good results out of China. But the most important thing is that we have the power to close the strait. That is affecting Iran and is certainly affecting China because China gets 15 to 23% of its seaborne oil imports from Iran and 45 to 50% of its seaborne oil imports through the strait. Now, we will let Chinese ships through if they were calling on, a Kuwait port or getting something from Saudi Arabia, but we're not going to let them through if they were getting their oil from Iran. And that's where most of China's tankers have been from Iran.
How painful will this be? How long will this before this tactic could force the Chinese to take a harder line with the Tehran regime or what is left of it? We're not entirely sure who we're negotiating with quite at the moment. How long before this will start to hurt the Chinese, and how much sway do you think they actually would have over a regime that's up against the wall, cornered, and still screaming death to America?
I think the Chinese have some influence because they've been supplying Iran with everything except for combat soldiers, sailors, and pilots, but everything else. So they do have some influence, and they were helpful in terms of getting the talks in Islamabad. But as people say, they were pushing on an open door because Pakistan and Egypt and others really did the heavy lifting to get those talks going, the ones that failed, by the way. China right now is hurting. I think they're hurting a lot more than they thought they would. We saw oil shocks in the Chinese economy. Some of the price data that's coming out of China, especially for March, indicates that the Chinese really were not prepared for this. And my guess is that Xi Jinping has decided that enough is enough. They want peace now. And by the way, the Chinese, they lit this fire. Now they're trying to douse it because I think they're really worried about their economy.
In what way did they light the fire?
Oh, well, Iran has a nuclear weapons program because of China, because China made sure that they had the materials, they had the technology, they had the equipment that the Chinese supplied either directly or indirectly. A lot of it through the AQCon black market network that was merchandising Chinese equipment. But also, we have seen not only Iran, but Iran's three proxies, the three H's, Hezbollah, Houthi militia, Hezbollah all have large quantities of Chinese weapons. You crack open any Iranian weapon with a microchip. That's either a microchip that the Chinese manufactured or which Chinese intermediaries sourced on the open market. So, Iran is completely dependent. Oh, and one more thing. It's not only the FT reporting today about this satellite, the Chinese satellite that the Iranians have been using, but remember at the end of last month, those supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles that the Iranians fired at our Abraham Lincoln, our aircraft carrier, those were Chinese 302, CM-302. So yeah, across the board, Iran's been fighting this war with Chinese equipment.
So if, we read reports as well that, the Chinese were prepared to offer missiles to down US aircraft. I don't think they did, but they were certainly discussing it. And as that charge list that you just read out there of all the support they're giving them in space, in the air, in tech and equipment and in nuclear. I mean, for Donald Trump to be now saying, well, we're all getting on, everyone's friends, he's being played like a cheap fiddle, isn't he?
Yes, I guess so, but we don't know. Going back to this, Trump keeping his adversaries and enemies off guard. So that could very well be what he's doing. I personally don't like it when we don't tell the truth about China and when we have these sort of statements, Xi Jinping's my friend. But I do understand that Trump has a different negotiating style. And we'll just have to see how it all plays out. We're going to know a lot in a couple months. And then after that, I think that we will prevail. But one way or another, we will know whether this has worked. And it's going to be very clear. It's either work or it's not going to work. And we're going to see how Trump has been able to navigate this. I'm a little bit concerned, but I do believe that he is more or less going to get what he needs and what America and the world needs.
You seem remarkably confident, but given the scenario we're setting out here today, it's basically the equivalent of America being in a proxy war directly with China. If China's paying the bills and picking the tunes, and maybe the Iranians pulling the triggers and playing it, and sort of almost a mirror of what's happening in Russia, then the chances of an escalation, if it goes wrong, surely are underpriced right now.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. And there's a lot of reasons why this could really go wrong. But I do think that closing the Strait of Hormuz in the way that President Trump has done is really good, because prior to that, the straits were closed to our shipping and the shipping of our friends, and it was open to China and Iran. And now sort of the reverse is the case. The strait is going to be open for friendly shipping, and it's certainly closed for Iran shipping, because I do believe our Brad Cooper, Admiral of U.S. CENTCOM, Central Command, I do believe that he's telling the truth when he's said nothing has run the blockade.
Yeah. Not yet, anyway. I mean, you'd be a brave skipper to try and take on what's currently parked off the coast of Iran. With the Chinese, though, I mean, look, they famously and somewhat cliched now, I suppose, they play a long game. They deal in centuries or in decades rather than short-term politics. There's a high chance that Donald Trump's going to be a lame duck by this time next year. The midterms are looking bleak, not least because of the hit of this war that's happened on the American economy, on American prices. Surely they could just sort of afford to sort of just go slow, really, with Trump, rather than have to really give any ground or give any movement with him, because, in 3 years' time, another president's going to be along.
Yes, and China has played that game for a long time. But Xi Jinping has actually exhibited some really short-term behavior. And I think the way he looks at this right now is that his economy is fragile. It could very well fail. And so I think the Chinese are starting to realize they need to speed this up a bit. So yes, both of them, both President Trump and Xi Jinping, I think are starting to see that time is a factor and they need to get this over with.
So this summit in May is shaping up to be one of the more important meetings of global meetings in a very long time, right?
If it occurs.
If it occurs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be discussed. We got so many different issues with China across the board. Things like fentanyl. These are issues which have not been solved.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping has made 4 promises to American presidents to stop the flow. 2 of those were to Trump, 2018 and last year. So that's a big issue for many Americans. Then you got trade, of course. You got all these geopolitical concerns, China's support for Russia, which you just talked about. The list goes on and on. So yeah, they could be consequential, but as I mentioned, they could very well not happen.
I mean, how much do you think that Donald Trump will call them out on things? We've seen the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, launch what's been dubbed in the tabloids as Operation Kowtow. He's allowed the Chinese to build giving planning permission for a super embassy, a spy hub right in the city of London, just right above crucial financial cables that billions and billions and billions of pounds are traded every second on the global markets, all for a little sniff of crumbs of a little bit of inward investment and maybe stop flooding the market with cheap steel. But in order to do that, he's had to turn a blind eye to numerous spying scandals. They wouldn't even, an espionage scandal in the United Kingdom collapsed because the British government refused to even say that Beijing could be perceived as a threat to Britain, which is absurd. From spying us from space on our cables, infiltrating our universities across the West. Isn't it time that someone called them out for this? And surely if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be Donald Trump, right?
Could be Donald Trump, but someone's already done it. There's a prime minister in Japan, Takaichi Sanai.
Yeah.
And on November 7th, in response to a question on the floor of the Diet, she told the truth. And it enraged the Chinese. And by the way, she was a Liberal Democratic Party, which was ailing when she became prime minister not very long ago. Well, in February, she won a landslide, historic victory that made the LDP more prominent than it's been since like 1955 when it was founded. So I think that Takaichi has shown the world what you can do when you stand up to the bullies in Beijing. I hope that President Trump takes that on board. And by the way, Trump did reverse Keir Starmer's giveaway of Diego Garcia.
Yeah.
I just hope, and I know I'm being overly optimistic, but I just hope that Trump will get Starmer to reverse the mega embassy decision, because that was just atrocious. I mean, this is Neville Chamberlain-level atrocious.
We've got plenty more to go on this one, so if you want the follow-up, make sure you're subscribed. It's just delusional, though. When you hear the Chinese government say that the law of the jungle should be obeyed, and America should respect international law and diplomatic norms. I mean, it's just laughable from these guys, right?
It is. The reason why Trump has started to take down the existing international system is because the Chinese were taking it down.
Yeah.
And Trump had the good sense to not obey and adhere to rules which the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and the North Koreans were not honoring. So it's unfortunate, but I think it's absolutely necessary. So when I ever hear the Chinese, as they just did 24 hours ago, talk about, this is terrible, this is a violation of the rule of law, international law, I just got to laugh.
I mean, that's all if you didn't laugh, you would cry, right? The other great strait that people are looking at, not in all of this, is the fallout around the world from the war in Iran continues. We've seen a complete fracturing and shattering of NATO. They're all at each other's throats. You've got Zelensky desperately trying to get attention keep attention on the situation in Ukraine. You've got underfunded militaries across the world, apart from America's, you could argue, across Europe, certainly. Loads of resources being piled into Ukraine. If you were the Chinese and you're looking at Taiwan right now, with the American army stretched in the Middle East, the European armies and navies completely non-existent and frankly hollowed out, and what arms they have had being sent to Ukraine, this would be the perfect time to strike Taiwan, wouldn't it?
It is the perfect time to strike Taiwan. But Harry, let me give you some good news for a change. And that is, Xi Jinping has decimated the Chinese military with his purges. Show you how bad this is for China. The Communist Party's Central Military Commission, which controls the military, had 7 members on it. Now there are only 2 because of the purges. There's Xi Jinping himself, and there's a general who is not an operational officer. He's a political commissar. He's a hack. Now, for China to launch an invasion of the main island of Taiwan, they'd have to do something they've never done in their history, and that is a combined air, land, sea operation. You need coordination among the various branches of the Chinese military. You can't do that if there are no officers at the top of the military. So for that and for some other reasons, yes, you're right. This is the perfect time to go after Taiwan. But fortunately, China is not capable of it.
Are you really that optimistic that they wouldn't even give it a, if this situation in the Middle East continues, if the talks fold, surely they're going to do something to liven things up a bit, aren't they?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because although I don't think that China would launch an invasion of the main island of Taiwan, it is perfectly capable of blundering into a war. We are seeing very belligerent activity from a ring of India in the south to South Korea in the north. If any of those incidents go wrong, then I don't think China can back down. I don't think it can de-escalate or act constructively. And to put a point on this, right now, China looks like it wants to start a war at Scarborough Shoal, part of the Philippines, with what it's been doing in the last 24 hours. So, you talk about being distracted and not paying attention to Taiwan. Well, we're not paying attention to Scarborough Shoal. And there's a long history here, which makes the shoal extremely significant. It sort of could be the Sudetenland of our era. So I really, really worry about what's going on there. So it's not so much that China says, Xi Jinping wakes up one morning and says, I'm invading Taiwan. It's them backing into a war. What's
the situation the last 24 hours and 48 hours there in the Philippines that's making you so concerned?
Well, at Scarborough Shoal, it has an opening, and the Chinese are now blocking the opening. In other words, they're trying to annex it, and their next step is to pour cement and actually turn it into a military base. This is a feature which is 124 nautical miles west of the main island of Luzon of the Philippines. It guards the mouths to Subic and to Manila Bays. It is very, very far, 700 or so nautical miles from China. This is where the United States taught China to be belligerent. We did this in 2012 when President Obama brokered a deal. I don't know how much of this you want to hear, but the point is, this is really, really significant. And it's one thing that we're not paying attention to. We are seeing, and it's not just at Scarborough, we're seeing other Chinese activity right now on its periphery, which is scares the bejesus out of me.
Please go on, keep going, it's fascinating.
At Scarborough Shoal 2012, both Philippine and Chinese craft were crowding around. Obama negotiated a deal for both sides to withdraw their craft. Only the Philippines complied, left China in control. Obama did not want to confront the Chinese, but what he did by not confronting them was he emboldened the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing that aggression worked. Right after that, China then started to militarize those islands in the Spratlys, which is in the southern portion of the South China Sea, turn them into military bases. It pressured Second Thomas Shoal, which is another Philippine feature, and it expanded the area of confrontation by going after what the Japanese call the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. The Chinese have a very weak territorial claim, called them the Dalyus. So what we did was China then went on a rampage because Obama backed down. Now, Obama sort of shuffles off into office and leaves this problem for the next president. This is just really, really bad on the part of the United States. We've sort of kicked this can down the road. So I worry about Scarborough, and I worry about Chinese activity in its periphery.
Well, I mean, you started out very optimistic in this conversation. You were looking at the positives, and now you've scared the bejesus out of me too. So thank you for that, Gordon. Finally, look, I just wanted to ask you, where are we with TikTok? I know you're an expert on all of this. You've made clear that you believe that 96%, I think it is, was as high as that. 96% of TikTok content on the situation in the Middle East favours the anti-Western sort of narrative. We were led to believe once the sale had gone through and the American consortium had bought all of this, then a good old Uncle Sam USA algorithm would be replacing the Chinese algorithm. But it doesn't appear to be happening yet, does it?
No, we got pushed around on TikTok. The Indians just banned TikTok after the Chinese incident in Galwan in June of 2020. We should have done the same thing because China's using the algorithm for all sorts of malicious purposes and been stealing data. They've never complied with any promise they've made on data security. What's happened now is, and we don't know the details because this has sort of been left off to the side, but we do know that the algorithm is still the Chinese algorithm, and the Chinese still own the algorithm. And that is, I believe, a fatal flaw in the deal that President Trump negotiated. Data security is probably okay because the consortium of US companies are managing that. And so that's probably okay. But this algorithm issue is something that deserves more attention. And thank you for raising it, because just nobody's talking about this.
But we've been around the houses on this show all week, really, on the fact that America may well be winning this war. They may be, pummeling the Iranians, really where it hurts. But they're certainly losing the propaganda war. If you flick on an American TV network, you read an op-ed in certain newspapers, you can almost squint and see them cheering for Iran. That seems like a pretty spectacular failure of that deal to allow this still to happen. And it seems that someone got to the president, maybe even his eye on the midterms and the youth vote, does want to sort of piss off a lot of American younger people. But it does seem like a real Achilles heel.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we can't have our apps in China, so why does China have its apps in the United States? So that is just so, it's just so unreciprocal. The other thing is that Trump doesn't understand information warfare. He gutted Radio Free Asia, gutted Voice of America. Yeah, there were problems at Voice of America, but he didn't need to do that. And the problem right now is that China's winning the information warfare, information battle around the world. I mean, when you have American students cheering for barbarism, murder, rape, torture of Hamas, you know that the Chinese have been extremely effective. And by the way, you referenced that, on TikTok, about 96.5% or so of the videos about Hamas favor the terrorist group. That's not organic. That's because of the Chinese algorithm of TikTok. So Trump I hope, is going to understand that this is not just a war of, militaries. This is a war where propaganda and information are critical. Remember, America lost Vietnam, not because we got beat on the battlefield, but because of the information warfare that was conducted by the Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians.
And some very good anti-war songs, to be fair. some pretty good American music came out of that one. Gordon Chang, fascinating. Not just drone wars, not just normal wars, but bot wars and algorithm wars as well. Thank you very much for joining us today, as ever. I'm going to take your sunny optimism on the talks, and we will monitor closely the situation in the Philippines. Thank you for joining us, as ever. Gordon Chang there.
Thank you, sir. So thank you so much, Harry.
The West won't save itself. Hit subscribe.